So it's my real privilege, actually, to introduce everybody to Tessa Jolls, our first keynote speaker for this June conference at the EdD. Tessa is president and CEO of the Center for Media Literacy in the US, and delighted to say also a visiting fellow in CEMP at Bournemouth University. She's recently completed a Fulbright scholarship in media literacy for strategic defense and resilience, as you can see on the screen. And that was published for NATO. So it's a Fulbright NATO report. So it's really a big deal in the media literacy field. And I think that I would say Tessa's a big deal generally in the media literacy field, and certainly has a huge international profile and really rich history. Looking at how to construct this introduction, I was obviously having to select from a huge amount of things I could say. And among many awards that Tessa's received, in 2015, she received the Global Media and Information Literacy Award from UNESCO in recognition of her work in media and information literacy and intercultural dialogue. And that was from the Global Alliance for Partnerships on MIL, in cooperation with the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. So really a significant award to have been given. Her methodology generally, this is not all of it, but generally involves working in partnership to demonstrate how media literacy works through school and community-based implementations. I think it's reasonable to say she's a world-leading figure in the field of media literacy. I'm thrilled that she's working with us in CEMP and is currently working now towards a PhD by publication with us as well. So it's certainly enough from me, and I will now hand over to Tessa.
Well, thank you, Julian. That's very generous. And I like to joke around and say that, you know, if you live long enough, it's amazing some of the things that can happen along the way. And so here I am. And I look back on my journey and it's like, oh my heavens, did that really happen? So I will talk about that a little bit at the end, because Julian had asked me to discuss a bit what my journey has been, and you know how this NATO report came about. But first, I thought it would be best to really dive into more information about the report itself, and get into more of those details, and then we can take a step back. And I'm really hoping there will be time for questions and discussion, because certainly it is my real pleasure and honor, truly, to be working with CEMP, and also to be working with Julian as my advisor for a PhD. So this to me is really a real capper for the long career that I've had in media literacy. All right, let's see. Well, you know, I don't need to tell all of you how we're connected these days so differently, and how that connection has just changed everything. And certainly from my perspective in the media literacy field, it's the advent of the internet, it's the advent of social media that have truly brought our field to the forefront. We've had waves of interest in the past over children's advertising and violence in media. We've had, you know, the cyberbullying and issues around sexuality, around body image in the media. Those have all been really big issues of concern through the years that have captured waves of interest, but nothing compares to social media and how that's driven an interest in media literacy, and one that's been a long time coming. So I have to say that I think we owe a lot to the technology giants, and at the same time, it really has pointed to why we've been saying for years that media literacy is really essential for citizens of the 21st century. Now, that actually has been recognized by NATO. And so NATO sees media literacy as part of its efforts toward resiliency. And they started in their public diplomacy division, along with the Fulbright Commission, a new kind of award, the Security Studies Award, that was begun in 2018. And I applied for that. And I was working at the time in Latvia. I taught for 6 months at the University of Latvia. And I have to say, it was a real education about post-Sovietic societies and the kinds of issues around propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. And so the timing of that was really pretty prescient in terms of my getting this award. And I was one of the first 2 people that received this award. And originally, I actually applied to do a study in Latvia, in Riga. But another person ultimately was given that assignment. And so I got a call and I was asked if I was interested in going to Brussels instead. And good heavens, I really didn't mind at all. So I said yes, and I headed to Brussels, and I was there in the fall of 2021. The Fulbright Commission postponed all of the awards for a while because of COVID. And so it took a few years to actually get the program off the ground. And then I came back to the United States, and I worked on my report from January, and it was finally published in September of 2022. So it took quite a while to write up and finish the research and really go through the review process, because I did submit the report both to NATO and to the Fulbright Commission, since it was going to get really widespread distribution. And subsequent to the publishing of the report, I was asked to go back to Brussels, and NATO has quite a number of conferences every year. I was invited to be at the conference for senior communicators, where they wanted me to really share the findings of my report and mix and mingle with people who were coming in from NATO, literally from all over the world, because again, this is really seen as a global initiative. And so definitely it's important to help spread the word, but also to help familiarize NATO people with what media literacy is. And so in that spirit, in November and December of 2022, we organized through the Center for Media Literacy and with NATO a webinar series of 6 webinars. The webinars were 1 hour. They addressed many different topics. It was propaganda, health, mental health. We addressed government agencies and media literacy. And Julian joined in on a session that we had on education that was really very, very good. Those are recorded if you're interested in taking a look. But in each case, we paired a NATO executive along with media literacy researchers, because our purpose was to help create a dialogue about media literacy and its role in security, and also in how NATO might look at media literacy, so that as opportunities for programming come up, there's more knowledge and more understanding about how media literacy can be utilized. So, I'm really pleased that the report itself didn't stand alone. It has had a lot of support along the way. And even now, NATO is eager to find ways to connect with media literacy researchers and practitioners, and to really help people understand where media literacy fits and how it can contribute to resiliency. One other point I'd like to make is that when we think of NATO, many of us, including especially me probably, I look back and I think of those early days when NATO was really seen as a boots on the ground kind of organization. But NATO takes a very broad view of security. So the word security can be applied in many, many different contexts: food security, housing security, cyber security. And so when we talk about security from a NATO perspective, we're really looking at a very broad range of both social issues as well as defense issues. And so it's important to think about security in that broader context. I will say too, it all takes time and persistence, because when you look at this timeline, I started trying to get the award in 2018, and the report didn't go out until 2022. So I'm sure all of you who are laboring out there in the field can identify with that, because nothing happens overnight. All right, this is just the report cover. Now, the report itself is divided into 6 parts. It covers the underpinnings for media literacy. And keep in mind that my own approach to media literacy revolves around the idea of representation. And I think there's pretty global agreement about that, but nevertheless, I think it's important to point out. And secondly, the report looks at the context that's driving the change and the demand for media literacy. And I think that's an important section, because there have just been so many societal changes that that really have focused now the need for media literacy, as I mentioned before. Then it also addresses where media literacy fits as a strategic defense strategy, because I've been finding in a lot of cases, many people don't even think about media literacy as being an important element for strategic defense. And so I think that it's opened up a new channel of thinking for many people in the field who didn't really associate it in that context. So again, especially since NATO has really been doing some work on defining media literacy's role, that's something that's important to understand. On the recommendations, I think the big one is that we need to take a systems approach to media literacy, and we need to really go after systemic change. And so to get systemic change, you have to have a systems-based type of approach. And we're looking at the need for scaling. Also, I took a look at the ecosystem for media literacy in NATO countries. So there's a section that gives a lot of information about reports, about indices, about policy documents, about models, about different resources, organizations, conferences, journals. So it's a snapshot, and it certainly can't be the end all be all, but at the same time, I did try to give a pretty comprehensive glimpse into how media literacy is currently structured in the NATO context. All right, in terms of methodology and how I conducted the research, well, first of all, of course, and part of this was just because my own knowledge of the field. I've been in the field for 25 years, and our organization actually goes back to 1989. And so I've certainly followed the development of the field for many years. And so policy documents, governmental regulations, major milestones for the field. I try to capture a lot of these kinds of documents that have really provided some highlights along the way. Um, the example that I'm giving here is the EU Audiovisual Media Service Directive. That was an enormous step in favor of media literacy because that directive called for all EU countries to have to report on their media literacy activities on an annual basis. And as we all know, what has to be measured and reported can get done. And so this was an important step forward for the field. And that's an example of the kind of milestones that I cited. I did more than 60 interviews with policymakers, researchers, practitioners, and I did that when I was in Brussels. Some of these were in-person interviews. Most of them were by Zoom or telephone. I had a general questionnaire that I used to make sure that I was getting some consistency in terms of the questions that I was posing. And so that was a very comprehensive way of gathering the information. The other thing was that I did record all those interviews. And so that was really useful at the end when I needed to refer back. Also, I went through a process for identifying model media literacy programs, and I identified a lot of those by talking to people and getting that information during the interviews. So these recommendations were made by people who are active practitioners and researchers in the field. And I think that that does tend to be a good way about finding out, well, where's some of the best work happening. And then I also did a survey of 64 people. I got 24 respondents to identify conferences, organizations, seminars, academic journals. And that way, again, I was looking to identify the resources that were most frequently mentioned by the researchers and practitioners who were making those recommendations. All right. In terms of the report contents and the emphasis, I really kind of divided in my own mind in two major categories. First of all, there's the supply side of issues around media literacy. And I think of the supply side as the impact of technology, the development of technology, platforms, narratives, how all of those technological and media advancements impact the populations. And that certainly is a huge area of study. There's been a lot of advancement in that. And something that's changed with natural language processing, with artificial intelligence, is that we can now do these kinds of analyses on a mass scale. And just as an example, during COVID, LexisNexis provided a real-time snapshot of major COVID-related questions and issues that you could go to their website and you could get an analysis based on millions of documents that were fed into this particular analytical engine. And so we've never had that capacity in the past to do that type of analysis on a mass scale. So this has opened up a whole new frontier for media literacy and for understanding these advancements. Secondly, on the demand side, we know that citizens, of course, act on the information they have. Risk management is important to all citizens, and I really see media literacy as a big part of risk management. And citizens need a healthy information ecosystem. They also need to know how to read that ecosystem. And so definitely media literacy has a key role to play. And then, of course, there's the combination of supply and demand, where citizens act as both producers of media and information, as well as consumers, and being active participants and users. And so here, I think we can look to people like Henry Jenkins, who have really broken a lot of ground about participatory culture, and how we can understand that on a deeper level. Um, and then finally, we really take the stance that media literacy is really central to educational attainment now. When we look at the developments with AI, for example, AI, we know, is not predicated on the idea that the information it provides is factual or accurate. It may be totally made up. And so definitely we need those skills of discernment that media literacy can help provide, in order to really be able to use AI effectively as a tool. So in general, in terms of the report overview and recommendations, I think in a way, the most important point is that citizens are the first line of defense. We have to look at everyday citizens as needing to possess the knowledge and the skills so that they can use media literacy. We have to empower citizens, and they have to be equipped to identify propaganda, to be able to understand how propaganda works, whether it's beneficial propaganda or not. And then, in addition, governments need to be not so siloed, in the sense that the way government is typically structured today, it's very siloed, where you have, departments of culture, communications, defense, education, and many times they don't talk to each other. But in a world that's networked, we really need a networked approach. And media literacy is actually, I think, a great way to integrate and synthesize many of the issues that we're all faced with. And so it's all the more important for these agencies to each have policies on media literacy and initiatives, but at the same time to be working together so that there's some consistency. All right, now some other highlights. I went into the whole idea behind the factors animating the growth of media literacy. I think a lot of you would probably agree with me that in past years, sometimes people have kind of conflated media literacy as being about misinformation, disinformation, fact checking. And frankly, I think that's far too narrow. And I'm pleased to say that NATO sees the importance of media literacy as being part of the cultural fabric. And so they are looking well beyond misinformation and disinformation as a way to encourage media literacy. Of course, we need to look at, well, okay, if media literacy is part of resiliency and part of helping citizens really be able to deal with crises or any kind of civil society issues, well then definitely how do we go about that? What's the approach? What's the philosophy behind that? Then I also gave a very brief overview of different media literacy philosophies and practices, because we know there's a spectrum of practice. And definitely from the standpoint of this report, and certainly my own work with the Center for Media Literacy and the organizations that I've been involved in, typically we look at an empowerment through education kind of philosophy. So the emphasis is on education and empowerment, not on trying to tell other people what to think or believe. I made some recommendations on meeting those systemic needs, and also included recommendations around evaluation and scaling. We've had many experiments around media literacy and around evaluating programs. And actually, there's, I think, a pretty robust research base for media literacy. And much of that research base is very encouraging, showing that media literacy can have a positive impact on knowledge, on attitudes, on behaviors. Certainly in the area of health, there's been a lot of positive research around media literacy's impact. And so we need more. and additionally, we need more systems level implementations, not just a project here, program there, but instead, for example, an education system in a country really incorporating media literacy into its daily practices and evaluating how that goes and how it works, how it can be improved. And then finally, I already mentioned, I gave resources and background on some government programs in NATO countries, and as well as various media literacy programs. Now, some of the recommendations specifically were around having a whole government approach. And I think the Nordic countries offer a good example, actually. Of course, they're small. They tend to be kind of monocultures, which goes a long way toward helping in terms of having that, well, I would say more integrated approach. But as one example, in Finland, KAVI is an agency that has responsibility for media literacy, and they convene meetings with all of the top level ministers to coordinate media literacy programming, to look at what's happening. And so having that kind of integration, having that kind of whole government approach is something that's highly desirable. And I will also share an anecdote, because there was another Nordic country, whom I won't name, who told me that they also are trying to take a whole government approach. They invited a lot of agencies to a meeting, and the only agency that would not attend the meeting was education. So I think that makes a huge statement in terms of the fact that we have a long ways to go in terms of really impacting the education systems as we need to. So definitely with media literacy emphasizing process as well as content. This is a huge change for the education systems, and so there's a lot of resistance, and it's going to be a long time still, but we again need that persistence to be able to hang in there. I mentioned already that research has shown that media literacy can be effective. We certainly need more evaluation. We need more systems level evaluation. There just haven't been a whole lot of cases that we've been able to approach on that level. I don't know how many of you are familiar with implementation science. This is a concept that's coming out of public health, but it's something that I believe can be very useful for the media literacy field. And I'm starting to see evidence of it, where there are theories of change, where the different programming elements really conform to these theories of change and are measured accordingly. And so I really would like to personally see a lot more research around implementation science and connecting that with our media literacy practice and evaluation. in terms of rethinking content, priorities, um, in the education systems as well as other systems, we really need to reinforce media literacy at every level. Um, Certainly in the education system, teachers aren't rewarded for teaching media literacy. They're not prepared, they're not trained. And so we really need a top to bottom systems overhaul that will support the teaching of media literacy, because at this point in time, it's still very difficult for teachers to really get the support that they need. And then finally, we need that emphasis on training and professional development. It's one thing to say to teachers, teach media literacy. It's a whole nother thing to provide the whole system and the training and support that they need. So I did put a lot of emphasis on education, because there also has been some evaluation of some State Department programs in NATO countries that has shown that it's teachers who really are the most effective um, people in terms of transmitting and helping people gain media literacy skills. And this was a comparison of teachers, librarians, community organizations, and also even some gaming. I think I've made this point. Scaling is key. Definitely, we need that consistency. We need programs that are consistent, replicable, measurable, and scalable. So definitely, those are criteria that we should keep in mind whenever we design programs. Um, Media literacy provides a global local opportunity. The skills of media literacy, the dispositions, the habits of mind that we teach and that help people acquire are global, they're human. But the issues, the media content, many of the platforms, those are local. And so we have a great opportunity to really provide kind of a global local mix whenever we do training, whenever we do implementation programs. Again, we need a systemic example. And the other thing is, I already mentioned persistence, but it's true. When I first came into the field, I remember meeting Renee Hobbs and having a conversation with her. And Renee said, it's going to be 50 years before we make a dent in the education system. And I came out of the corporate world. So, I was like stunned. I thought, oh, 50 years, that's so long. And now, I think that's probably the least of it. So definitely, I don't see media literacy as a silver bullet. It's not the end all be all, the answer to everything. But at the same time, it is the fundamental approach that we need, I believe, for this new age of technology. And we need those process skills. All citizens need the process skills. And so I don't see it as an instant process by a long shot. We're in it for the long haul. Okay, that kind of gives you the overview of the report, and I'm happy to talk about it more. Julian had asked me to share some information about kind of, well, how did I get to the point where I was able to do something like that? And so, of course, as we mentioned earlier, I'm a visiting fellow with CEMP now, and it's incredibly exciting for me to feel that I can be part of the team, really part of a group that is working toward these really essential goals. And I'm really delighted that I feel that the work that I've done through the years has a chance to be recognized through the PhD by publication, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do this work. So hopefully that will be something that will provide me with an opportunity to get to know all of you better, and hopefully to be able to do some projects together. To me, that's what it's all about. Um, I've been with Center for Media Literacy since 1998. I started as a volunteer. I was on the advisory board for my children's elementary school. And I still laugh about the name of the school. It was called Our Lady of Malibu. It was a small Catholic school in California. And so our principal came in and said, we want to start a media literacy program. And nobody knew what media literacy was, including me. And so when they described it, I realized that it was kind of a combination of so many um, experiences that I'd had in the past and my communications background. And so I volunteered to head the committee. That in turn led me to Elizabeth Tolman, who founded the center in 1989. Liz was a real pioneer here in the United States and helped bring media literacy to the US. And so it was really my great fortune and privilege to be able to work with her and really apprentice with her, because there was nowhere to go for courses in media literacy or any kind of formal training. And so I really learned about media literacy through my work with Liz. Liz also at the time was the center was acting as a distribution center for media literacy materials from all over the world. And so we imported a lot of materials from Canada. And many Canadians, Barry Duncan, John Pungente, Chris Warsnop, these were all real leading lights in the media literacy field who had written, who were very accessible, wonderful people. And so I was able to delve in, just read everything I could get my hands on, and also be able to meet a lot of the people who actually helped pioneer the earlier days of the field. So so I always consider that really one of the truly lucky parts of my early career in media literacy. Prior to joining the center, my own professional background is as a publisher. I owned a publishing company. I published a subscription-based newsletter on human resource management. My audience was senior human resource executives throughout the United States, although we did have some international subscribers. And I generally covered strategic communication, organization development, compensation systems. So I looked more at the quote unquote soft side of human resource management. Prior to that, I worked as a consultant in communication. I headed a regional practice for a really major consulting firm. They have offices all over the globe. At the time, it was called Towers Perrin. They've morphed since then, but I was the lead for strategic communication and organization development for their Midwestern region. And then very early in my career, I taught. I was a teacher of adult illiterates right out of college. And it was a real eye-opener to work with that population. And even though the work of the center often focuses on youth, and we've developed a lot of curricula for children, at the same time, it's really adults who are the people that we work with most frequently and whom we really work to train. So definitely that work with adults is the focus, the primary focus of my work through the years. Right now, I would say that primarily the center focuses on research and development we've developed a methodology for media literacy that we've implemented. We had evaluated through a UCLA longitudinal study. So our frameworks that we typically use are evidence-based. And honestly, before I retire, my goal is to identify a large system where we can implement media literacy as, central to the operations. And so, maybe it would be an entire school district in the United States. Maybe it would be a state education agency. Maybe it would be a library system in a country. But whatever it is, I really believe the time has come to do a system-wide implementation. And it's really my dream to be able to do that and test it out somewhere, somehow. So so that's kind of what I'm shooting for at this point. And then, of course, I really am active in the media literacy community. I consider that a very important part of my work because without all of us and without the ability to carry the work on, we don't have a future. And so definitely having that community is essential. So I'm involved with, namely with UNESCO, certainly with NATO. The IMLS is the Institute of Museums and Library Sciences here in the United States, and they have recently been charged with forming a task force in order to encourage media and information literacy in the United States. And so I'm active with that. And then, of course, in terms of affiliation, I'm proud to be part of CEMP. And we do have affiliates with the Center for Media Literacy. We have affiliates in Singapore, Peru, Lithuania, and we have a couple here in the United States as well. So we're always looking to grow our network because, I think that's really important if we get a particular grant opportunity to be able to reach out and be able to have people on the ground in a different country who are capable of really working closely with us. So hopefully that kind of gives you the picture. And Lord knows there's always something to be done, and that's my joy. So I don't know how much time we have here. About 15.
It's perfect timing. We aim for about 15 minutes for questions, and we have 15 minutes for questions, which is pretty perfect. So Emma's asked a question, but then says it's been partially answered. So Emma, if you don't mind, can I ask you?
Sure.
What's the?
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm doing my doctorate focusing on media literacy levels amongst 16 to 19-year-old students and their teachers. And like Julian was saying, in the UK, it's very kind of disjointed. There's a lot of kind of theoretical basis for it. And we've got things that are coming out of Ofcom and things that are coming out of CEMP and DCMS and things like that. But there isn't like a joined up approach, and there is like not a lot of implementation. And in this country, we have something called Ofsted. So they're the basically regulatory body for education. And the only thing that is kind of vaguely media related is this kind of idea of online safety. But I wondered if you had any kind of like insider knowledge. I know you just mentioned a lot of American stuff, but any insider kind of knowledge about anything that might be occurring in the UK education system at all?
Oh my. Well, actually, I wish I could say I did, but I don't. I would say, though, my observation is right in line with what you're saying about the disjointed nature. And I've actually been lamenting because Robin Blake, who was the first director of the OVCOM Media Literacy Unit, actually is a good friend of mine. And so I had a chance to really observe what was going on in Great Britain in those earlier days, and then kind of follow it through. And of course, a lot of the center's work is informed by the work of Lynn Masterman, of Barry Duncan in Canada, John Pungente, Barry McMahon out of Australia. So, these early kind of Anglo influencers definitely have had a huge impact on our work. And so with so much coming out of Great Britain in those early days, Great Britain was certainly a fantastic leader and looked at all over the world as a leader in media literacy. And I don't get a sense of that steam still being in the education system. Now, thankfully, OVCOM has come along and taken up some of the work, and so I do get a sense of momentum out of OVCOM. But again, I'm speaking as someone outside the system, outside the country, but I don't get a sense of momentum in the education system. And I certainly am not in a position to say why. I have no idea, but I do get the sense that education's lagging in the UK, just as it is in almost every other country.
Thank you. Aaron has a question next.
Hi, Tessa. Firstly, I really enjoyed that presentation. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
So I just thought I'd share my kind of background story. So I came to Arizona in 2021 to teach here. I'm originally from the UK as well. I was teaching English, and then I got a bit, it felt a bit stale. So I wanted to create my own class. I was a media teacher in England, so I created a media literacy class here in Arizona. It was a very interesting process. There's only 3 like it in the whole state of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in, one of them is in Scottsdale, and one of them is in Katina Foothills in Tucson. I don't know if you're familiar with those areas, but
Yes, I am.
the kind of trend is that very affluent areas in Arizona, probably the richest neighborhoods in the state. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if this applies to the UK so much, but especially in the States, is it kind of a, I don't want to say classist because it goes against the American idea, but is it kind of a, if you're more affluent, you kind of dive into media literacy? Is that the way it's kind of going in the US, or is that just Arizona thing?
Well, I think that's a great observation, and I would support it. The independent schools in the United States jumped on media literacy 20 years ago, about the time actually when I got into the field. And so I've done work with several of the top private schools in the United States, and they get media literacy. I'm not saying they all do the greatest job at really integrating it in the way that I personally believe that it could be done, but nevertheless, it's on their radar and it is taught. Whereas the public system, not so much. We've done a lot of work in the public system, and the public system is fraught with all kinds of problems, and the resistance to change and to really embracing process skills, it's just not happening. And so I do think that there's kind of a bifurcated system here, and really it's it's pathetic, but
It is. It's completely paradoxical as well, because like virtually everything we can do now on social media, you can pretty much live everything through social media, business, education. There's so many facets to social media, and yet it's not taken seriously in kind of traditional education. It's strange how there can be such a disconnect in that way.
Right. And I mean, believe me, we've been butting heads with the education system ever since I can remember, and have been involved. And the progress is glacial. It is glacial. And so this is where the growth of charter schools, the growth of private education, the growth of homeschooling, believe it or not. I mean, those are probably the best chances for media literacy education to really take root. And the public systems, right now, in terms of the public systems, the state of Washington is the most advanced. And they now have a law that requires media literacy education. They established a state office for media literacy. And so they are really taking a more systems oriented approach to incorporating media literacy. So I would say look to the state of Washington. There's talk about other states, for example, Rhode Island, or was it Rhode Island? No, New Jersey just passed a law. But that's for information literacy. It's driven through the librarians, and that's a different emphasis. So I really do believe that the state of Washington offers us some hope. And we're actually writing up a case study right now on state of Washington and tying it to implementation science, because the state of Washington has used a theory of change that I think is really beneficial for them, in that it's driven through the grassroots.
There was
And
that lawsuit in Seattle. I don't know if you heard about it. There's a school district suing a social media company for misinformation.
right.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating lawsuit.
Yes. Yes. So the state of Washington, I would suggest looking to them.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tessa, I have a question. If not, I'm just checking no one else has got their hand up, or before I use my chair's privilege to ask you myself. So, like you mentioned, Ofcom, and I remember the Robin Blake period as well, and we can talk about that forever. But like at the moment in the UK, it's an interesting conundrum, because there's a lot of kind of oxygen for media literacy, but it's coming from Ofcom and DCIT now, was DCMS. It's coming from regulatory policy,
Right.
Government organizations, not from education. And we've rehearsed that already, that problematic disconnect. And then you're working with NATO, and although NATO are not a regulator, it very much frames media literacy in terms of defense and resilience to, and I wonder how, whether, so in a way, it's brilliant, right? Who wouldn't want NATO to be interested in what we're doing, but it does frame it in a particular way. So can you just talk a little bit about how you've managed, operating as a media literacy practitioner and scholar, but framing this in a way that is fit for purpose for NATO's particular perspective?
Yes. Well, of course, that's been enabled because the NATO Public Policy Division, I believe, takes an enlightened approach to media literacy. They're a pretty savvy group, I would say, based on the people that I've met. And so they really do see media literacy broadly. They don't see it as a vehicle for censorship. They don't see it as a vehicle for containment. Instead, they do see it as a vehicle for empowerment, because I believe that it comes into a belief in people, a belief in citizens, a belief in a democratic approach. And NATO is very cognizant, I believe, of the need to really encourage and uphold democratic values. So in that sense, I think, Julian, one of the ways I feel that I can kind of keep my compass in it is my own belief that media literacy, in a sense, encourages freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of association, and that these freedoms are essential because you can't go through a media literacy exploration process, questioning everything and being skeptical, mind you. I don't mean being cynical. I'm saying being skeptical. You can't be a skeptic if you're going to be shut down before you even ask the question, right? So my own compass revolves around that. The fact that media literacy is about skepticism, it's about freedom, it's about questioning, it's about inquiry. And democratic values, I believe, support that. And so if we're looking at security from the standpoint of helping citizens, mind you, helping citizens be able to encourage and support democratic values, well, then media literacy to me seems to be kind of a logical extension of the kind of skills and the kind of processes that citizens need to know in order to be able to fulfill their function as citizens and as the first line of defense. So I haven't felt a conflict there. And it's probably because of the way I look at it. I've heard presentations, for example, by people from communist China at UNESCO conferences where people will come in and give a presentation and they call it media literacy, but frankly, it's not media literacy in my opinion, because they're talking more about online safety, where you're given directives about what to do to protect your identity. Well, it's important to know that. I'm not disputing that. But at the same time, media literacy is not directive. Media literacy encourages inquisitiveness and exploration. And so I think that in situations like, for example, I don't consider fact-checking organizations as being media literacy organizations. Why? Because they're doing the work for you. They're doing the fact-checking according to their criteria. They are making their judgments about what's factual or not, and they are telling you what they see as being factual or not. Now, I'm not saying it's not a useful service. It can be helpful. But to my way of thinking, with media literacy, what we teach are the questions. We're not giving people the answers. We're teaching them how to ask questions, how to explore, and how the media system works as an operating system. And so if you understand how the media system works and understand the concepts behind media, well, then you're going to be able to ask more nuanced questions. You're going to be able to ask better questions that will guide you to deeper information. And then you can make up your own mind and kind of use media literacy as a risk analysis process. So I don't know whether that helps, but that's kind of how I meander through it in terms of reconciling the idea of kind of defense in a democratic context.
No, it helps a lot. And I like the way you said it about it's not a constraint because of the way you approach it, the way you look at it. I think that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well explained. Thank you very much. So we are now at the end of our time. I'll stop recording, but before I do, I just want to say thanks so much, Tessa, for giving your time today to us, and through whatever way you want to express your gratitude with a real clap or electronic clap, please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please,
No
anyone,
problem.
be in touch with me. I will love to hear from you.